You know, it is. We're looking straight at what could be the most massive looming disruption of our generation. We're talking about the potential displacement of tens of millions of jobs. But our mission today isn't to just panic.
No, panic doesn't help anyone.
Right. We want to cut through that panic and definitely cut through the incredible polarized political arguments around it to find a real, actionable, win-win solution.
And to do that, we're looking at a highly detailed white paper and a step-by-step decision matrix authored by Dr. Alan Barnard, who's the CEO of Goldratt Research Labs.
Yeah, and he's applying a very specific TOC tool here.
Exactly. It's called the Pro-Con Cloud Method. He applies this to the current superheated debate over whether government should legally halt the building of new AI data centers.
Okay, let's unpack this, because before we can even apply a problem-solving framework, we have to understand the actual threat, right? Like, why is this different from, say, the invention of the tractor or the personal computer?
Well, the scale and the speed are just fundamentally different.
Yeah, I mean, the quotes in our sources are staggering, and they aren't coming from, sci-fi writers. This is Dario Amodei, the CEO of Anthropic, one of the top AI labs, predicting that half of all entry-level white-collar jobs could just vanish in 1 to 5 years.
1 to 5 years. That's tomorrow, economically speaking.
Yeah. And Mustafa Suleiman, the CEO of Microsoft AI, he says most white-collar work will be automated in 12 to 18 months. 12 to 18 months.
It's wild.
And then you have Jim Farley, CEO of Ford, predicting nearly half of all U.S. white-collar jobs eliminated within a decade.
So when the actual architects of a technology, the people building it, are telling you they're engineering human labor out of the equation at that speed, I mean, you have to look at the underlying mechanics of what's happening.
Yeah, because we had industrial revolutions before.
We have. But in past industrial revolutions, displacement was always sequential.
Right.
So when agriculture was mechanized, human labor shifted to urban factories.
Right, they moved to the assembly line.
Exactly. And when those factories automated, labor shifted into offices and knowledge work. There was always this sequential safety valve.
Like a backup plan for the workforce?
Yes. But what makes this exact moment fundamentally different is that the safety valve is totally broken. We are facing simultaneous displacement.
Ah, right, because it's hitting everything at once.
Precisely. The robotic systems on the factory floor and the cognitive AI systems in the accounting department are being deployed at the exact same time. The traditional escape routes are just being sealed off across the board.
It's not just, a ladder with a missing rung. The entire building is coming down all at once.
That's a great way to put it.
And the sheer physical scale required to run this automation is just mind-blowing. I mean, our sources point out that Mark Zuckerberg is building a single AI data center the size of Manhattan.
Just one facility.
One. And it's going to consume 3 times the electricity of the entire city of New Orleans. So the physical infrastructure to power this mass displacement is literally being poured in concrete right now.
Which really forces us to look at the societal impact of this, right? History and economic research consistently show that involuntary job loss at a community scale, it isn't just a blip in the economy.
No, it's devastating.
It leads to horrific psychological and social outcomes. We're talking measurable spikes in clinical depression, severe anxiety, substance abuse, and family breakdown.
Yeah, it's like the American Rust Belt opioid crisis, all that deindustrialization we saw in manufacturing towns, but applied to every single sector, everywhere, all at exactly the same time.
Right, because it goes way beyond just losing a paycheck. It's the collapse of the structure and, frankly, the dignity that work provides to a community.
And hardware requires human policy to regulate it, which is exactly where the whole system is currently just breaking down.
Completely breaking down. Lawmakers are looking at these exact same predictions. They're panicking, and it's resulted in a totally stuck debate.
So the primary solution that's on the table right now is a government-imposed moratorium, basically a complete legally enforced pause on building any new large-scale AI and robotics data centers.
Right. Hit the brakes entirely.
And it is fascinating to look at the political dynamics here because we are seeing some incredibly rare overlap. You've got prominent left-wing figures like Senator Bernie Sanders introducing legislation to pause development specifically to protect workers and public mental health.
Which makes sense from a labor perspective.
Right. But then you also have strong support from right-wing and conservative voices who are deeply concerned about the massive concentration of corporate power, not to mention the national security implications of a few giant tech monopolies operating with basically no oversight.
Yeah, and we're just neutrally reporting on the sources here, but it is clear that both sides of the aisle are feeling the heat of this hurricane.
Definitely. Yet, despite that bipartisan fear, the debate itself is entirely paralyzed.
Well, because one camp believes we absolutely must pause to save humanity and, prepare our social safety nets, while the opposing camp believes that if we pause, we instantly lose our global dominance.
And I have to admit, I kind of push back on the idea of a pause myself. Like, the mechanics of it seem flawed. If you're listening to this, you're probably thinking the exact same thing.
What's what?
If we just hit the brakes on our own data centers, aren't we just handing the keys to the future over to adversaries who will absolutely not stop? I mean, a moratorium in one country doesn't halt global development. It just guarantees you lose the race.
And you are voicing the exact, entirely valid fear of the anti-moratorium camp. If we pause, other global powers won't. And that completely rational fear is what traps us in a binary conflict.
We're just stuck.
Exactly. And this is exactly where Dr. Alan Barnard's application of the theory of constraints comes in to dismantle the trap.
So how does TOC actually work to break a logjam like this? I know Dr. Eli Goldratt developed it decades ago, mostly for manufacturing, but how do you apply it to public policy?
Well, think of a constraint as the bottleneck in a pipe. In a factory, that bottleneck might be a slow machine. But Goldratt realized that in human systems and policy, the bottleneck usually isn't money or time.
What is it then?
It's a hidden assumption. An assumption that traps two sides in a direct, seemingly unsolvable conflict. So Dr. Barnard's pro-con cloud method is this 5-step process designed to literally evaporate that conceptual cloud by exposing those false assumptions.
Okay, so step 1 requires us to map out the 4 quadrants of the conflict, right? So that every single legitimate concern is visible. Let's walk through it.
Let's do it.
So quadrant 1 would be the pros of change, the pros of enacting the moratorium. If we implement the pause, the mechanism is that it buys us urgent time. It directs political capital toward actually preparing workers and updating safety nets before the job losses hit critical mass.
Right. But then you have to map quadrant 2, which is the cons of change. This is the pushback you just raised a minute ago.
The geopolitical risk.
Exactly. If we implement this pause, the fear is we drive AI investment, top talent, and innovation completely out of our borders. We push it to other countries or underground, which weakens our national security.
Okay, so then we map the alternative. Quadrant 3, the pros of the status quo. If we don't pause and we just keep pouring the concrete for these massive data centers, we maintain our technological and economic dominance. We stay at the cutting edge.
Which brings us to the final box, quadrant 4, the cons of the status quo.
The societal collapse.
Right. If we keep building without guardrails, millions of jobs vanish in months, and our institutions just can't adapt fast enough. We get that community-level devastation we talked about.
What's really striking when you lay those 4 quadrants out is how undeniable every single box is. Like, usually in a political debate, your whole goal is to prove the other side is just totally wrong.
Right, you attack their premise.
Yeah, but looking at this matrix, I can't say any of those 4 outcomes are incorrect. They are all highly probable.
And that's because in any really deep, complex conflict, both sides are operating to protect completely legitimate needs.
Yeah.
That's a core tenet of TOC. The pro-pause camp is absolutely right about the social devastation. The anti-pause camp is absolutely right about the geopolitical risk. A true solution can't just be a watered-down compromise. It has to fiercely protect the legitimate needs of both sides.
And this is where the source material gets incredibly clever. Once you clearly see all 4 quadrants, Dr. Barnard's framework states you can engineer a solution that actively keeps the pros of both sides but neutralizes the cons.
Right. Our sources call this the change plus plus solution.
Change plus plus.
Yeah, it's an engineered innovation that breaks the trade-off entirely. The solution in the white paper isn't a blanket ban. It's a highly conditional moratorium on new, large-scale data centers, bundled with a really tightly defined policy package.
Let's break down the mechanics of those pluses, because to me, this is the real breakthrough. Plus 1 is engineered to maintain technological competitiveness, which satisfies the folks terrified of losing the AI race. The mechanism here is that you pair the pause on the massive physical data centers with heavy, targeted incentives for AI research and development. You fund smaller, hyper-efficient data centers, and you pour resources into open-source, public good AI.
Exactly. The underlying logic is that innovation itself doesn't stop. Software development actually accelerates. What pauses is merely the massive physical infrastructure rollout. those immense power drains that enable mass-scale commercial deployment before society is ready.
So you intentionally shift the investment away from just raw brute force scale.
Yes, you channel it into algorithmic efficiency, safety research, and open source models instead.
Okay, but then we hit +2. And I have to be honest, when I first read the brief on this, my immediate thought was governments are notoriously painfully slow.
Oh, universally.
Right. If you grant lawmakers a 12 to 24-month pause on data centers, the most likely outcome is they spend 11 months arguing in subcommittees, pass absolutely nothing, and then the pause ends and we've just wasted a year.
That is the most common and historically validated fear regarding government intervention. But that exact vulnerability is what +2 is engineered to solve.
How so?
+2 introduces an automatic sunset clause. The moratorium is legally tied to pre-agreed legislative milestones. The government has a strict mandate to pass specific worker training and social safety net laws within a 6 to 12-month window.
And if they don't?
If they fail to pass those laws by the deadline, the pause automatically evaporates.
Wow. So it's not a blank check of time. It functions as a strict binding performance contract for lawmakers.
Exactly.
Let's make this concrete for the listener. A legislative trigger would look something like the tech companies only get their power permits for the new data centers unlocked on the exact day the Senate signs the worker retraining fund into law.
You nailed it. It entirely flips the traditional political dynamic because normally gridlock wins in politics, right? Doing nothing carries no immediate penalty.
Right, they just stall.
But under this change plus a plus structure, if the politicians gridlock, the tech industry gets exactly what it wants. The pause lifts immediately and construction resumes.
Oh, that's wild. So the lawmakers who desperately want the pause to protect their constituents' jobs are highly motivated to actually compromise, cut the red tape, and pass the laws quickly to keep the moratorium in place.
It changes the incentive structure of the entire room. You protect the workers without stalling the science.
You're fundamentally pacing the physical deployment of the tech to the exact speed of our social safety nets. That is a brilliant theoretical solution.
It is structurally elegant. But, and this is crucial, step 4 of the pro-con-cloud method acknowledges a really harsh reality. A great theory in a vacuum is completely useless if it shatters upon contact with the real world.
Right, because how do we know the key stakeholders, the CEOs, union leaders, senators, won't just look at this change plus proposal and dismiss it as academic fantasy?
Well, we stress test it. The framework forces you to actively anticipate the strongest, most cynical arguments against your idea from every key player, using a yes but and yes and methodology.
So you don't fight their objection.
No, you absorb it and build a mechanism to solve it.
Let's play this out so you can hear how the mechanism works. Let's start with the AI industry. They look at this conditional pause and say, yes, but this still puts an artificial cap on our computing capacity, which hurts our global competitiveness against foreign adversaries.
And the yes and response is yes. And the legislative milestones will be explicitly designed to reward responsible innovators first.
Okay.
Right. When the pause lifts, the companies that spent the moratorium investing in energy efficiency, safety protocols, and public good AI models will be at the very front of the line for new capacity permits. It engineers a race to the top for safety, rather than a race to the bottom for scale.
Okay, what about the labor advocates? They might look at this and say, yes, but this change plus idea is almost too clever. A sunset clause feels risky. Workers need firmer, more absolute protections against being replaced.
Yes, and the capacity caps on the data centers are directly legally linked to hard enforceable safeguards. The physical expansion of the technology is gated to the expansion of worker protections. They move in lockstep. You literally cannot have one without the other.
I love that. And then you have the lawmakers themselves. A politician might look at this conditional sunset clause and say, yes, but this is way too complex to pass through a deeply divided legislature. We can't pass a massive omnibus bill in 6 months.
Yes, and we solve that by providing simple phase policy examples.
Yeah.
The mechanism doesn't require one giant omnibus bill. It can be a series of standalone, highly specific legislative triggers that are way easier to pass individually.
It's basically rhetorical judo. You aren't arguing against their valid fears. You're using the momentum of their fear to make the actual policy mechanics stronger.
Exactly. It builds a highly resilient strategy. But the pro-con cloud method doesn't stop at just theoretical stress testing. Step 5 demands a real-world, highly constrained test. They call it the 90-day experiment.
And I want to spend some time on this because Usually, when a think tank or a politician comes up with a big policy idea, they immediately launch a massive, expensive political campaign, right?
Absolutely.
They spend millions on ads, they try to rally public outrage, they lobby for years, just hoping to eventually force a vote.
Which is an incredibly risky mechanism. It relies on brute force rather than scientific validation. The vast majority of those campaigns just fail, wasting millions of dollars and years of time.
Right.
Instead, Dr. Barnard's matrix outlines a scientifically grounded experiment. The goal is to distill this complex solution into a simple, highly readable 2 to 3 page policy brief. Then, over a strict 90-day period, you test it with just 4 carefully chosen stakeholders.
Just 4 people to test a global policy.
Yes. The mechanism requires 1 lawmaker, 1 labor advocate, 1 industry representative, and 1 academic expert. By restricting the sample size, you treat the policy like a scientific hypothesis.
You move from endlessly shouting on cable news to actually testing the logic.
Exactly. And you measure the success by very objective criteria. Do these 4 stakeholders engage substantively with the brief for at least 30 minutes, or do they just offer a polite dismissal? And most importantly, do at least 2 of them view this conditional moratorium as a more viable path forward than the blanket bans currently being debated?
So it's an iterative loop. Based on the friction you encounter with those 4 individuals, you iterate. You tighten the milestones, you fix the flaws in the sunset clause.
You refine it.
Right. And if the brief survives contact with those 4 specific experts, you have empirical proof that the policy is actionable. If it dies in the room with them, well, you didn't waste $10 million and 3 years of advocacy on a flawed premise.
It brings the rigorous discipline of the scientific method directly into the chaos of political debate. You validate the mechanics before you ever attempt to scale it.
Think about the journey we just took here. We started with an impossible, intensely polarized debate about the AI job apocalypse. We looked at the terrifying speed of the threat and the massive physical scale of these data centers.
Right.
But instead of picking a political side or just succumbing to panic, we applied the theory of constraints. We surfaced the hidden assumptions causing the bottleneck and engineered a highly specific, testable, win-win solution that legally protects workers while completely preserving the engine of global innovation.
Which really is the true underlying value of analyzing these sources. Whether you are a CEO trying to navigate industry disruption, a worker worried about the cognitive automation of your specific job, or just a voter watching politicians argue in circles, understanding how to reframe binary conflicts using the pro-con cloud method gives you a tremendous advantage.
A real superpower.
Exactly. It teaches you that you do not have to accept unacceptable trade-offs, whether in global policy or in the mechanics of your own career.
It's about finding that hidden third path that is totally invisible when you're trapped inside a binary argument. But as we wrap up this deep dive, there is one final thought I want to leave you with. Something to really mull over as you watch this technology evolve in the coming months.
How's that?
Let's say we pull this off. Let's say we successfully implement this conditional pause, the lawmakers perform, we pass the legislation, and we create a robust, modernized social safety net. Let's imagine a scenario where everyone's income and physical needs are legally protected, even as 50% of the cognitive labor force is fully automated by these systems.
So the economic and infrastructural problem is technically solved.
Yes. But what happens to the human psychological need for purpose? Even if our bank accounts are protected by a new economic structure, how will society fundamentally redefine what gives a human life value, dignity, and meaning when labor is no longer the primary engine of the economy?
Wow. That's the real question.
It is. We might successfully engineer a way to save our livelihoods from the hurricane, but what are we actually going to do with our days when the storm passes? Think about that. Until next time.